Is there anyone in this entire battalion who can actually shoot straight? The general's frustration echoed across the Afghan ridge as 13 consecutive misses from Army snipers had left an enemy mortar team untouched at extreme range. Specialist Nora Castellane quietly stepped forward from the supply convoy, her grandfather's competition rifle case in hand. Nobody knew she'd been state champion before the war stole her. Hearing in 1A, Specialist Nora Castellane stood at the edge of forward, operating base lightning in coast province, watching dust devils dance across the valley stretching toward Pakistan. 27 years old, 4 years into her Army career as a logistics specialist, she'd never mentioned her marksmanship background to anyone. The partial hearing loss from an IED blast 2 years prior had disqualified her from combat arms, relegating her to supply runs and infantry management. Quick question for those watching. Ever been overlooked because of a disability that had nothing to do with your actual capabilities? Hit subscribe if you know what it's like to have skills nobody thinks to ask about. She'd been attached to the convoy, bringing emergency ammunition resupply. When the crisis started, enemy mortar teams had been hammering the outpost from a ridgeline 2,487 m away, beyond standard engagement range, but within reach of precision rifles. The battalion sniper teams had exhausted their ammunition, trying to neutralize the threat, but the extreme distance, altitude, and winds had defeated every attempt. Castellane grew up in Montana's Absaroka Mountains, where her grandfather, a Korean War veteran and competitive long-range shooter, had built a 1,000-Y range behind their ranch. By 15, she was winning F-class competitions against shooters 3 times her age. Her grandfather's custom-mule 338 Lapua Magnum had been her inheritance, a rifle with a 30 inches Krieger match barrel capable of maintaining accuracy past 2,000 m with the right ammunition. She'd enlisted at 23 after college, initially selected for sniper school based on her qualification scores. Then came the IED. In Kandahar, a supply convoy hit by a roadside bomb. The blast ruptured her left eardrum permanently, leaving her with 40% hearing loss on that side. The medical evaluation board ruled her unfit for combat positions requiring binaural hearing for directional sound location. The rifle had traveled with her anyway, properly registered and stored in the unit arms room with all required documentation, a reminder of what she'd almost been. She'd kept practicing at whatever ranges she could find, adjusting to her new reality, learning to read wind through optics and feel, rather than hearing the environment's subtle cues. Her logistics unit knew her as quiet, competent, unremarkable, someone who moved supplies and filled out forms. They didn't know about the medals she'd won before the war, or that she still held Montana state records at 1,2500 yard that nobody had touched in 5 years. The emergency briefing was chaotic. Colonel James Morrison, the brigade commander visiting for a site inspection, paced the operations center, while staff officers argued over options. 13 separate engagements, over 200 rounds of match ammunition expended, 0 enemy casualties. The mortar team operated with impunity, dropping rounds every 20 minutes. We need CAS, the operations officer suggested. Close air support could eliminate the position, whether socked in for the next 8 hours. The Air Force liaison responded. Nothing's flying in this. Morrison slammed his fist on the table. Is there anyone in this entire battalion who can actually shoot straight? These mortars are going to reduce this base to rubble before air support arrives. Castellane stood in the back with other support personnel, having been pulled into the briefing to coordinate the ammunition resupply her convoy had just delivered. She studied the targeting data on the screen. 2,487 m to the mortar position. Elevation difference of 280 m. Crosswinds varying between 12 and 18 m. Hour through the valley. Colonel, she said quietly, I can make that shot. Room turned. Morrison's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. Specialist, this isn't a qualification. Range, that's nearly 2.5 kilometers in. Mountain winds. She straightened. Sir, I have a 1338 Lapoa Magnum in the arms. Room, custom mule for extreme long range. With hand-load 300 grain Berger hybrid. Target rounds. I've made comparable. Shots in competition. The battalions. Lead sniper instructor, Master Sergeant. Cole actually laughed. Specialist, you're a supply clerk with a hearing. Disability. This isn't amateur hour. Outside the command post, Castellane signed out her rifle from the arms room with the armless emergency. Authorization. Colonel Morrison having approved the unusual request. The walnut. Stock bore tiny notches, not kills, but competition wins. Each one a memory of when her abilities had mattered. Before, the war redefined her worth through medical categories. She thought about the medical board ruling, the phrase that haunted her, no longer qualified for combat positions requiring full sensory capabilities. Her right ear worked perfectly. Her eyes were 2015. Her trigger control remained in the textbook, but the Army saw a disability, not an adjusted capability. She'd accepted it, buried the frustration, focused on being useful where they'd let. Through the night forescope, she could see the mortar team clearly. 3 fighters rotating through their firing, sequence with practice efficiency. They thought they were untouchable at this range against standard military rifles. They'd be right. She pulled out her data book, not a military issue, but the same one she'd used since she was 16. Wind, cools, elevation tables, atmospheric, corrections, all mapped for her specific. Hand loads, the 300 grain Berger hybrid. Target bullets had a G1 ballistic. Coefficient of 818, loaded to 250 feet. PIS. The math said it was possible. Difficult, but possible. Colonel Morrison arrived at her hasty firing, positioned with half his staff in tow. Area cleared for emergency engagement. Specialist, I'm not comfortable with this. You're not a designated marksman. Another mortar round impacted the base, destroying a communications antenna. Smoke rolled from the operations building. Morrison's jaw tightened. He turned to Cole. Master Sergeant, what's your assessment? Cole looked through his spotting scope at the target. Sir, it's a 2,487 m shot with variable crosswinds and significant elevation change. Our trained snipers couldn't do it. Castellane had already built her position, rifle supported on a rucksack, natural point of aim established. She'd brought her Kestrel weather meter from her personal kit, reading real-time wind, gradients and atmospheric pressure at altitude. Colonel, with respect, I'm not asking anyone else to attempt it. Just give me authorization to engage. 3 rounds to prove capability. Morrison watched another mortar impact near the medical station. You're authorized for emergency. Counter battery fire. 3 shots. Specialist, make them count. She settled behind the rifle, feeling wind patterns. Through visual cues she'd learned to trust more than sound. Her left ear's damage had taught her to read the environment differently, watching grass patterns, feeling pressure changes on her skin, observing mirage layers. Through the scope, first shot, she held 8.7 milliseconds of elevation, 2.3 milliseconds right for wind. Additional corrections for spin drift at this extreme range. The custom trigger broke at exactly 3.5 pounds of pressure. Through the scope, she watched the vapor trail, the bullet's path visible as it displaced A. Impact 6M right of target. The mortar team scrambled. Briefly, then dismissed it as random. Fire from the base. Wind shifted in the valley, her kestrel showing an increase to 16 miles per hour with gusts. She'd felt it before the meter registered a pressure change against her right cheek. Second, round chambered, hold adjusted to 2.8 milliseconds. Right compensating for the gust pattern. She'd identified cycling every 30 seconds. Second shot, the trace curved through the mountain air, fighting wind, sheer across two separate zones. Impact, 1 meter left, striking rock just below. The mortar tube, the enemy fighters went prone, finally understanding they were being targeted. 1 round left. Colonel, she needs more ammunition. Someone suggested. Morrison held up his hand. She asked for 3. She gets 3. Castellane controlled her breathing, found a natural respiratory pause. When cycle was coming around, 20 seconds, until the lull she'd identified. Motor team was moving, preparing to relocate. 15 seconds. Wind dropping from 16 to 12 miles per hour just as she'd mapped 10 seconds. Target standing to lift the mortar base plate. The trigger broke. The bullet flew for 3.2 seconds, reaching its apex 38 m above line of sight, fighting through shifting air densities. At 2,487 m, it struck center mass. The team leader dropped. His companions abandoned the mortar and fled. The operation center was silent. On the drone feed, the abandoned mortar position was clearly visible. One figure, motionless beside the weapon that had terrorized the base for 6 hours. Colonel Morrison stood before the assembled battalion staff. Specialist Castellane just accomplished what our designated marksman couldn't, at a range that pushes the limits of what's possible. With that platform with a personal weapon she's maintained through proper channels despite being medically disqualified from combat positions. He turned to the medical officer. I want her case reviewed for medical waiver. Immediately, start the paperwork for an exception to policy. Hearing loss in 1. It doesn't negate what I just witnessed. Master Sergeant Cole approached Castellane privately after the brief. Specialist, he said slowly, I've been an instructor for 12 years. That wasn't just marksmanship. That was reading wind patterns most people can't even see. Where did you learn that? She thought of her grandfather teaching her to feel the mountain drafts, to watch how eagles adjusted their wings in flight. When you lose one sense, you develop others. The IED took my left. It didn't take my eyes or my trigger finger. The shot was officially recorded at 2,487 meters in the after-action report, verified through laser rangefinder and drone footage, but kept at classification level due to ongoing operations. More importantly, it triggered a medical waiver review that would take months to process through proper channels. Castellane returned to her logistics role the next day, but something had shifted. She'd been invited to assist with marksmanship training, teaching wind reading techniques that didn't rely on sound. Her grandfather's rifle went back to the arms room, properly logged, but now with a purpose beyond memory. 6 months later, she received notice that her medical waiver had been approved for limited combat support roles. A new pilot program was evaluating soldiers with partial disabilities for specialized positions where their limitations didn't affect performance. The colonel's evaluation summary read, simply, excellence adapts